Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Discover new strategies and tactics as Susan Solovic interviews today's top business leaders and entrepreneurs to reveal their stories and insights. And now, the host of the 1% Edge, business expert, Susan Solovic.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to, and thanks for joining me for this episode of the 1% Edge podcast. I'm Susan Solovic. This is the program where I get to bring you the very best of the best so you can build your business and create success and a competitive edge. You know, there's an old saying, I've heard it for years, that location is critical for your business. But it's more than simply the neighborhood you select anymore. Now, I'm an advocate with the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, and we always review the best cities and states for business growth. It can make a huge difference, whether the environment is welcoming to small business and to your growth opportunities. Well, I'm happy to say my guest today is an expert in economic and urban development. He's advised cities across the country and around the globe. So please join me in welcoming Steve Pedigo. Hi, Steve. How are you? Thanks for being here.
Hi, Susan. Great to meet you, and thanks for having me.
Sure. So you've done a lot of studies about the importance of economic development. So what do you see in terms of the importance when looking at a city or a state for entrepreneurial growth?
Okay, great. So one of the first things I think to think about is there is a larger question about, does location really matter, right? And I think you hit on it a bit in your introduction. And one of the things that I would suggest is that yes, location is absolutely still critical. I mean, it's critical for both for your personal happiness, but also your business growth. And as you sort of think about, strategy, particularly as you're thinking about if you're scaling your business or you're growing your business or maybe you're starting something off, is that understanding the locational conditions and how it fits within your business strategy is key. So what matters? A few things. One, I think, is the most important thing we know, right, is that human capital or the talent, the people that work for us, are essentially critical to ensuring that the business grows or the business scales. And so understanding your talent needs, and particularly understanding if the particular city or place that you're looking at can meet those needs. So, for instance, one of the things that we know is it's just like you or I have skill sets, cities have skill sets. Some cities are tech cities. Some cities are design cities. Some cities are, engineering and science. And so really understanding the types of talent that you need is critical, and understanding if the city can provide that talent is important. So I think talent is one of those key things that we're talking about as we're thinking about locational decisions. The other thing that I think of when I actually think about sort of talent is this whole idea of what we call the clustering effect, right? Like businesses, that network, as you know, building that network is really critical. So what's that ecosystem? Not only for that ecosystem with other entrepreneurs, other folks to sort of share ideas, but, if you are thinking about needing suppliers or folks that can provide you with a different type of service, does the community sort of meet that need in terms of that? So this clustering effect is sort of the second sort of thing that I think of. I think all the important things in terms of corporate tax structure and incentives. If you are a business that's maybe in a distressed area or thinking about it growing in a particular city, looking to see what types of incentive programs or assistance programs are really critical there for you. That's probably a third thing that I look at. But the other thing I think that's also important is this question of quality of place, right? This question of, is there things for your workforce to do, for you to do? Because one of the things that you're going to have to do is recruit people to work for you, recruit talent. Your city also communicates your brand a lot of times. And so that quality of place issue can play an important role as well.
Okay, so I'm going to just kind of flip the coin here just for a minute, because I work virtually, like I can work from anywhere. So how does that play into this scenario if basically we can get human talent from any parts of the world right now?
Yeah, I mean, look, technology's allowed us to connect. Like you and I are connecting today. Right. But at the end of the day, one of the things that we know, right, not to give you sort of the 101 in urban development or economic development history, is that human interaction still matters, right? Even yourself being in Florida and building your business, it's still important for you there to have a network of people around you, right? Like minds. What we do know, right, is that, as my colleague Rich Florida would say, is that the world is extremely spiky. And that is that even as you think about technology allowing us to connect in all over our place, What we do know that's happening is this idea of a concentration of assets, meaning that particular areas are becoming concentrations of talent. Particular areas are concentration of different types of consumers that we're trying to reach, different types of businesses, different types of innovation, capital, right? We know one of the most spiky things out there is capital infusion for businesses. And so understanding, even if you're a virtual-based business, even if you're a business that communicates and works with different folks, that physical environment that you're in, that ecosystem, will still have a big impact on how successful you are. Some great examples of that, right? Let me just sort of give you a little bit of examples of that, right? I mean, this idea that if you are if you're a music business, right, or a music data business, the fact that most of your customers or most of your consumers are in a place like New York or Los Angeles, you have to weigh the question, is it important for me to be close to my customers? Because there are trade-offs, right?
Sure.
You're absolutely right. And virtually, you can make the trade-off of living and working anywhere, but with that becomes trade-offs, right? Access to customers, talent, all that jazz.
So what about, we know right now that the baby boomer generation is being outnumbered by millennials. So do you find that there's more of an interest in terms of geographic locations, in terms of millennials and quality of life, those sorts of things?
Absolutely. I mean, so for instance, if I'm that Generation X or that Generation Y that was sort of forgotten generation, right?
Yeah, we kind of passed over you guys.
Totally, everyone does, and I always tell my students, and I'm always kind of a jerk about it being that we sort of passed over. But one of the things that we know is that when we look at millennials, particularly my students at New York University is a great example of that. They are now not making location decisions, particularly on if I'm going to work for company X or company Y. They're making location decisions on where they want to live. And they're evaluating locations about lots of different things: quality of life, commute, access to thick labor markets. And so my millennials are now making location decisions and picking locations before they pick the opportunity, right? So a lot of times,
so they're making a lifestyle choice instead of
right. This idea of lifestyle choices, and then even as you know, right, as you get into cities, I'm in New York. It's a large area, right? You can make diverse location decisions even within that about the type of lifestyle that you want. So absolutely, millennials are making location decision first. And then all of the other things are sort of following on that.
That's interesting. Now, I remember about, maybe 25, 30 years ago, there was a futurist. Her name was Faith Popcorn. I'm sure you've heard of her. And she wrote about how we were all going to be in cocooning. We were going to work in our houses. We weren't going to socialize. There wasn't going to be a lot of face-to-face. But what you're actually saying is the face-to-face is becoming more important.
Absolutely. It's Jane Jacobs 101. Jane Jacobs, the great urbanist who wrote The Death and Life of Great American Cities, about really what drives economies, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. The idea that people come together, the friction of people working together, coming together, that chaotic collision, right, is a critically important. So much that it's interesting. Like Tony Hsieh, the development that has been having some successes, but also some challenges in Las Vegas. One of the things that they have done with the development of the new Zappos campus, actually in downtown Las Vegas, was actually calculate the number of potential quote unquote collisions, people coming and running into each other that they can have, because what they believe is that actually improves productivity, innovation, all of those other things that really matter to business success. So I think that connection is really, really important.
I've always said that even though we live in a high-tech culture right now and everything's rapid and but everybody still we long for that high touch. We want to be recognized as a person.
We crave that authenticity, right? The idea that we can come together, build community. I mean, I think, as we go back to location decisions, one of the things that you mentioned about sort of thinking about locational factors, and I left it off, was this question of community. Yeah. Some areas, right, are much better at building community than others, right, in terms of locations. And some cities are more open and welcoming. The idea of social capitalism, right, meaning that lower barriers to entry. It's easier to break into a community. It's easier to have a place where you can sort of create those networks. Because of that, that's one of the key factors. Another key factor of locations that we sometimes forget about, right? That becomes really important about just being able to build a community or be in a community of other people that are going through. As you know, being an entrepreneur can be a very difficult process, right? Yeah. So having that support structure around you is also critically important, and location provides that.
So how do you think these trends are going to affect strategic business decisions going forward in terms of let's say Amazon. I know they're looking to open some new facilities. Is this going to affect how they make those choices?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, if you think about the way that Amazon is going through the RFQ process, they're looking at exactly the same features that we just talked about, right? Access to capital, access to not human capital, access to quality of place. One of the things that is sort of a key point for Amazon is ensuring that its workforce is happy, right? That it is a place where the workforce can thrive. And so, thinking, I think as an entrepreneur, if you're thinking about that human capital is your number one asset, yes, you want to manage that opportunity, manage them in an environment that has a supportive culture that drives an innovation. But also, if you're really wanting to retain talent, right, thinking about what that external environment looks like. What is a city like? Is it a place where you can actually attract talent? There's a much different location strategy or a talent attraction strategy for businesses in a place like Austin, Texas, right? That's got a reputation of being a great place to live, than a place maybe like Tulsa, Oklahoma, right? Which is, and I've worked in both, which is a little bit more locationally challenged with some of the assets. Not to say that one is better than the other, but that location strategy and the way that you think about that talent attraction piece can be a challenge, can be different.
Yeah, it's just like a business brand, right? Your city gets branded a certain way. So let me ask you this then, given that this emphasis on this lifestyle and the location and everything, let's say I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. So we've had a real crisis with our downtown city. Do you see now businesses maybe coming in and saying, we need to help renew, revitalize some of these urban areas in these cities?
We hope so, right? I mean, if you think about where we are now, as we think about many of the cities that are challenged, we have to hope that the private sector, the sort of university and real estate sector, what we call anchor-based institutions, will play a greater role. We know the government is strapped, right? We know that there's less funding, budgets are tight. We're not seeing as much investment from sort of public sources to do some of the things that we need. We're having to reinvent infrastructure, all of that stuff. We have to absolutely hope that businesses play a greater role. And you are seeing that, right? I mean, you can see that with, just down the street from us in Newark with Audible and Prudential playing a greater role in the revitalization of Newark. Think about the revitalization of what's happened in downtown Detroit with Dan Gilbert and his group and all the entrepreneurs that he's put together. You can start to see this question of businesses wanting to play an absolutely greater role. And frankly, we have to hope that's going to happen. And for a lot of places, right, for a lot of our communities, the St. Louis's of the world, right, some of the cities in the Rust Belt, it's not going to be outside attraction. It's not going to be the idea of outside businesses going to do it. It's going to be a lot of these homegrown entrepreneurs, right? This idea of people that have been in the community for a long time, wanting to see their community grow, that are going to play a role in the revitalization of their home and of their community.
Well, what do you think about elected officials like mayors and governors? What role can they play to actually help generate some more success with these areas?
It's a great question. I think
I only ask great questions, Steve.
There's a great book by a former colleague who recently passed away. Ben Barber wrote this great book called "If Mayors Ruled the World." Look, I think local government and local officials and mayors, city officials, city council members have always been much more at the forefront of business and urban and economic development than even state officials and or even federal officials. Frankly, the federal government has never played a big role in community development. Look, what can city officials do? One thing that city officials do is they act as the cheerleaders, right? This idea they have to be the brand ambassadors. And so as you run through who have been some of the best mayors across the country, the Bloombergs, the Meninos, the Carl Deans, the Kirk Watsons, the Hickenloopers. One of the things that they did well, yes, they did great policy stuff, but one of the things they did really well was they were absolutely good cheerleaders for their city. Cheerleaders in the sense of promoting them for business investment, but also being advocates for the business community, right? One of the things I think sometimes we think about is that economic development and business development divorcing itself from the private sector. And really what we know to be true is that the private sector helps set those conditions, but the business sector is really what drives this. And so the city officials have to be really the cheerleaders for that process.
You're talking about New York City. I mean, I remember years ago when I go to New York City, and it was not a friendly place, and it was dirty. And then Giuliani and Bloomberg came, and they built much cleaner city, much more inclusive. And so, how do other cities build that inclusiveness? Like, I'm going to go back to St. Louis right now. We're a very divided city right now.
Yeah.
So, how do you build that inclusiveness in communities?
Well, it's interesting you say this, right? I mean, so there is a Bloomberg many years ago wrote a great piece in the Financial Times that said, in fact, I just discussed it yesterday with my students about his prescription for cities, and that is that cities have to be cool, creative, and in control. The idea of they have to have a really strong brand. They have to be places that are creating new ideas and new products and services, and then a place that is really sort of managing all the issues with this. I think that if you're thinking about cities across the country and sort of what they can do, and I think it's pretty simple, right? One is cities have to continually think about how they're innovating new products and services, right? So that means supporting entrepreneurial communities, right? And it's interesting because we have now seen more and more communities put a startup piece or an entrepreneurial piece in their economic development and business development strategy. And that's kind of new, right? We've sort of supported small businesses, but scale-ups is kind of a new thing. I think focusing on people, human capital, this question that, not just attracting companies, but thinking about how you're positioning yourself for talent attraction and retention. And this is really where the equity piece has become really important, because for a long time, we divorced economic development from equity. We just thought that all growth was created equal. And what we know now is that some growth creates inequality. And the question is, how do you create on-ramps, get people more involved? Inclusion, and then finally, this inclusion piece being a place that's opening and welcoming. And a lot of communities are now even sort of supporting this. In fact, there was a great piece on PBS NewsHour last week where you're starting to see cities like Detroit and Pittsburgh, these Rust Belt cities, places that have traditionally sort of been viewed as closed communities, sending a message or developing public awareness campaigns saying, look, we're open for business. We accept all types of people here. Come do business here in our community, right? So this inclusion piece is critical. And then finally, you have to build great places, right? Great communities, investing all those things that matter: education, safety, crime, restaurant amenities. All that stuff really becomes critically important in creating that fabric where you can build that environment on top of it.
So a lot of that depends on developers, real estate developers. People are willing to go in and take a risk. So what advice, what can you share to encourage people to say, yes, I'm going to go in there and do this?
Yeah, so we call those. It's interesting because real estate developers are playing a much larger role in community development than before, right? It's not just about, if we thought about real estate development sort of maybe 10 to 15 years ago, it was about building the development, build the development, and you sort of leave. And that's not the case anymore. It's much more messy, right? Our cities are contested for space. And so we wrote a piece, my colleague Rich Florida and I wrote a piece called Building Inclusive Prosperity. And one of the things that we argued for was that developers have to see themselves much more engaged in the community, right? You have to see yourself as a part of the community, not as an outside part of the community. So that means, to get the things that you want as a developer, to be invested in the community, you may have to make some trade-offs. You may have to build more affordable housing. You may have to be an advocate for entrepreneurial growth, right? You may have to think about how you are selecting the tenants for your types of businesses, right? What types of companies are you putting in there? And then also thinking about how we sort of design our spaces to be more inclusive, right? So that in my mind is so how developers have to be sort of successful today, because you're no longer now just doing the development and leaving. You're much more engaged and part of the community, I think.
Well, I think, too, with the developers, you want to make sure that they're not just doing something for themselves in a vacuum. They're building something that fits into the community, that brings people in, that engage.
You have to understand the types of people that live there, right? You have to understand, just as an entrepreneur, right? You have to understand the client, right?
Absolutely.
You have to understand the target market. So understanding the types of people that are there, who you're targeting with that particular types of development, and understanding, right, that not all developments can do everything for everyone, right? That there is a particular target market, particular segment that you're trying that you're looking at, and understanding what are the demographics of the city. As I tell my students, just as businesses have to understand, entrepreneurial clusters, they have to understand talent, they have to understand markets, developers have to understand all of that as well. If you are thinking about, doing development in a place like Detroit, it's much different than a place like Boston, right? The needs are different. And so understanding those needs is really, really critical.
So, Stephen, I'm just curious, how did you get involved in this? Because it's a fascinating subject. So how did you get involved in this?
I started my career sort of doing, I went to Carnegie Mellon, met the guy named Rich Florida who wrote The Rise of the Creative Class, really sparked my interest in community development, did urban development in Washington and Portland and a few other cities, and then was at a think tank for a while, and then have been really sort of, had the opportunity to do a lot of advising work across the country. And I think that's kind of what made my career sort of interesting, because I think what's interesting about this space is that no place is alike, right? Yeah. So what works in a place like, Jerusalem is not going to work in Miami, and what works in Miami is not going to work in Vancouver. It's quite different, right?
So what can we see from our cities in the future? Just put on your crystal ball right here. Look at
more dense. Density is going to happen. I think people are going to live differently. And so I think we will embrace this idea of an urban growth model, as some folks have said, meaning that people want to live in urban environments. I think the rise of the sharing economy will have a transformation as well, right? As we think about how people are sharing goods and services. I think that we will be probably, it's interesting with the advent of technology, one could argue that we're more disconnected, but this question that the reason that we move into urban areas is because we want to be more connected, right?
Sure.
We are by definition, want that interaction. And so it will be this interesting antithesis, right? Friction between the role of technology, like we're talking today, and that community creation as well. And I think places will be much more, hopefully much more diverse. Now the question, will they be more integrated? I'm not so sure, right? Our cities and urban areas face some big challenges, right? Class divide, segregation, inequality. These are good. I say this. These are good problems to have. If you're someone who has studied the life and the cycle of cities. Cities for a long time were looked as the ills, were places where we didn't want to be. They were unsafe. They were manufacturing. They were dirty. They were not pleasant places to be. And so now that we've got people coming back into cities and the investment in cities, the real thing we face, both I think as a business community as well as a civic community as large, is how do we manage those common goods equitably for everyone?
I agree. It's funny. I grew up in a very small town, 3,000 people, right? So, and when I was in New York City, people would say, how in the world do you live in a big city like that? But you stay in your little parameter. I could walk in the grocery store, they knew me. I go in the restaurants, they knew me. And you just have your little network of people, your little nucleus. So
it's the same thing wherever you are, right? You build community in the same type of space, right? Exactly. Yeah. I too grew up in a small town and tell my folks that all the time, right? Yeah. It's a matter about just, in a sense, sort of you build that community just as you would anywhere else.
Right. Well, Stephen, I really appreciate you. I think this is a great topic for all of us in business to think about, and probably think about it more and more as we go forward. So tell people, if they want to get in touch with you, find out more about your work, where do they go?
So you can learn more about our work at NYU at sps.nyu.edu/urban lab.
Okay.
Or you can check our website out at creativeclass.com, or you can always find me on Twitter, and I am Stephen Pedigo.
I saw that. And we're going to actually put links to all of that on our website too, so everybody can access you. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I hope you'll come back and talk with me again soon sometime.
Yep. Susan, it was great chatting with you. Thanks for having me.
And thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of the 1% Edge podcast. I'm Susan Solovic. Be sure to tune in next week. I'll bring you another thought leader to help you get the insight and innovation you need to create a competitive edge. And be sure to tell all your friends to subscribe too. Until then, take care and good luck.
Thanks for listening to the 1% Edge. If you found these insights and tips helpful, be sure to hit the subscribe button on your podcast player and leave a review in iTunes to help others discover the 1% Edge.